Hi, I'm Blaine Lewis, president of New Approach School for Jewelers in Nashville, Tennessee. And today I'd like to talk to you about burr control. One of the things that is kind of difficult for me when I first am trying to help somebody get started with their stone setting experience is to help them gain control of burrs and to help them keep from ruining as many mountings and so on. So let me show you some techniques that I use that are really tried and true, work I think spectacular. When you look at the flex shaft, and today I'm using a micromotor, I'll explain a little bit more about that in a minute, but when you look at a given task that we're going to do, and here I'm just going to use a setting burr and cut some seats into a 4-prong mounting. This is a Tiffany style mounting, but it would be, I'd basically be performing the same thing if it was a basket or if it was an oval basket or something along those lines. I'll cut a vertical seat, and I'll also show doing some undercuts. But let's talk about the burr control itself. When I go in to cut and make a bearing like this, one of the things that I'm always doing is right here. This is the middle finger on my right hand. I'm right-handed, so I hold the flex shaft that way. And this is my ring finger here, okay? My ring finger is setting on this GRS Benchmate as a kind of general stabilizer. And then my middle finger is touching the burr, and then if you look at this prong right here, or even this one, I have some contact with this, so that when I go in to cut a bearing, what you see is a fair amount of control. So when I go in to cut, I can look at this and say, you know, I'd like to be lower. Well, I'll make the decision to go lower, but then I stop, and now I'm going to migrate to the left to begin to cut this bearing. Let me stop for a second and show you really how this is being held. Right across the tip of my finger. Now, let me remove my finger for a minute. And then I want you to consider now with my finger off of the burr and off of the setting itself with my finger off. I want you to think about what is my real control with this? What is my connection? So as I go in here, you're probably going to see this time, I'm going to have a little bit more time controlling even the vibration of the burr or just maintaining a particular area, even though I'm cheating. I'm using my middle finger to support me. And that's what I do when I've got a really big burr that say might chew on the end of my finger just a little bit. So when you look at taking all of this off, all right, now I want you to realize, and this is the way a lot of people cut bearings, is that where is the true control, okay, of this? Well, it's in my shoulder. It's my shoulders moving my arm. If I don't have a brace in some way to control this, now it's more in my hand. But if I pull out and I'm not connected to either my fixturing jig, what's holding the ring, or if I'm not connected to the ring, then it really is my shoulder and my arms, and we don't have great dexterity there. The way I like to teach this is I like to say, okay, if I was to reach up and grab your hand and take control of that this way, would you still be able to cut bearings? And since I hold it in my fingertip more in the way that you would use a pen or a paintbrush, the action with a pen and a paintbrush is in the tip of your fingers. It certainly isn't from the wrist. As soon as you let this hit your palm, and say at the top portion of your hand, now it's this that must be your finesse, you know, because you're touching here. You can't really move this as well. When you get out here into the fingertips, you literally have all kinds of fine motor skills, just like I said, when you're using a paintbrush or the way a surgeon would use a scalpel or, you know, a pen or a pencil, okay? So this is really important. Now, a lot of times when I'm trying to teach this, people are somewhat fearful because they consider this burr to be dangerous, and they don't want to put their self in harm's way. So I want to show you a couple things that can really help, all right? As the burr is spinning, first of all, when you go inside the head, okay, when the burr spins, the burr wants to walk to the right side. So I'm going to put this down for a second. I'm going to pick up a smaller burr, and what I want to do is I want to show you how a much smaller burr, if I use this smaller burr, it's not trapped within the cage of this mounting. So this smaller burr, when it spins, it could come out, and it could, cause to, maybe abrade my finger or cut me mildly. Okay, it depends on the type of burr. But what I try to do in this situation in the beginning is to show this in such a way that the burr can't come out of this, and you begin to develop some control here. Okay, so let's talk about just, if you take a bigger look at the way I'm holding this. First of all, you can look at, say, the number 30 handpiece, okay? This is probably the most common by far way of holding a burr for any of this. And when you use this, and I don't have to have a burr in this right now just to show, this can be held in the same way as a micromotor. But the point that I want to make is that some people will use this kind of hold for whatever type of handpiece that you're doing. So I'll switch back to what I have a burr with, and they'll use this type of hold. That you don't have the fine motor skill control that way, and you don't have any way to connect yourself through fingers or whatever. You don't have any way to connect to the touch. I've seen people grab this even harder and harder as they're frustrated as the burr runs around what they're doing, and this is just one of those things that makes stone setting harder to learn, without proper instruction. The other way that you see very commonly people hold it is like this, and they're using the thumb as connection, and this is way better than what I just showed you, but it's still, I would make the analogy, if I had a paintbrush in my hand, a pencil, I certainly wouldn't expect the best and most refined out of that, because I'm still left to use my palm for my control. So these are no-nos for me, and just simply holding this, and it's funny, when you relax a little bit and you don't try to over grip this, then you have a lot more individual control. So let's take another look at exactly how this will go. What I want to do is I want to use smaller burrs, and I want to show you some things about some common pitfalls, and just show you the good and the bad about burr control. Okay, so I've chosen a burr that I could fit inside, pick my bearing depth, and then without having the burr wedged into the prongs or exactly pushed on a prong, I'll get the burr running, and I'll get it up to what I would call its general, tool speed, okay? That varies burr to burr, but you can't use a burr slow like this and listen to that kind of growl. That is not doing anything. That's like running a lawnmower, just incredibly slow. It doesn't have the proper velocity to cut. I also don't need to have it just completely wound out either. I don't need that kind of speed. So somewhere about a medium speed, something like that, and you can begin to see particles fly here. Then I would turn, and I'm not going to cut everything at once. I'm going to cut an indicator, and then I'll come back. I'll cut what I call an indicator bearing. It gives me something to analyze whether it's straight or not. Come back in. Once again, I'm standing on my ring finger, pinky, and then I'm using my middle finger up against the burr. Now, if you can see this little dimple in my finger, that's because I'm literally standing on this prong, and that's my connection. As soon as I lose that connection, the burr's gonna bounce like that. See, it has vibration that's difficult to control, and it can bounce out, run off, or whatever. So I make some connection to it. I begin the burr. Once I get it to working speed, you go in and you let the burr do the work. So you just run it, just be patient just a little bit. You're not gonna do this so fast. And right here, tip of my fingernail, you can see that bearing cut beginning to take place. That's not as obvious over here. So this is the third prong. Now, when I'm cutting bearings, once I determine what my my preferred depth is gonna be as far as where I want the stone to set. I begin to watch above the prong, so where I'm pointing with my fingernail. I begin to show, and I wanna maintain that. So if I'm doing this all the time, I'm obviously not cutting a really nice straight setting. Maintain that now and just let this cut, rotate, come back, set back up again. Now, a lot of times people get in trouble by trying to take one burr, the size of the stone, and they'll take that burr and they'll try to cut their way all the way into this mounting. That can be difficult to do and causes a lot of difficulties because it can cause the prongs to wrap around, because what happens is the burr begins to wedge itself in to the setting, and I find the best way to do it is somewhat individual. It really gives you the most control. Now, if you look at this burr, this is a 5mm burr for a 6mm stone. That differential gives me a little bit of room to move the burr around, a little bit without bumping everything. And as soon as I begin to cut this, and I make this migration into all these prongs, I'll have more room to move this around without hitting the other prongs. Okay? But still, I'm still trapped. If you look at it this way, I'm still trapped in between this cage. Okay, let me take this now and show you what the wrong burr selection may do to you. With this smaller burr, okay, I'm not trapped. I'm not confined whatsoever. And sometimes that's mandatory. That's what it has to be because of the shape of the head, you know, and different things. But right here, I can cut this and I can maintain control with proper speed. Okay, so I'm cutting the bearing. All right, but as soon as I do something like slow up too much or push too hard, watch what happens. Now, that gouge on the side of that prong, you know, a few of those, and all of a sudden you have a finding or a mounting that can, you know, you've got serious problems with it and can ruin them. Okay, so the size of this is going to help you gain some control. Okay, without my finger on this, okay, I have no control, and I've seen people in class, you know, until they get this fundamental, you can see them just having difficulties doing it. So let me show you again a little bit of, you know, real control. So I can cut this bearing with this because I'm grounded with my finger and everything. So it's not that this bigger burr is mandatory, but you know, having the smaller one can be really difficult when you're in the beginning, when you're trying to learn. Okay, so let me talk about now a different method for cutting prongs. This is a setting burr method, to which the prongs must be folded downward over top of the stone. Let's talk about a heart burr method. Okay. In the heart burr method, the burr control becomes even more important, because the heart burr method, as far as using something to undercut, it's like using a bit of a more of a sharper circular saw kind of blade, and you're seldom are you going to use this burr in the bigger size. And the reason for that is, a lot of times when you go to cut in, and the golden rule for prong setting is normally that you cut about 50% of its lateral, say from the back side to the front side, that you're going to take up about 50% of that when you cut. Okay, so when you cut with a heart burr, the heart burr's pavilion is normally not as deep as the stone, so I'll tip it down. If you were using a burr anywhere near as big as what I was just showing, when you go to tip it down, you're going to cut these tapered edges so that the burr would actually begin to tip down and hit those. So you're normally using a smaller heart burr. But let's look at the burr control issues on this too. Again, it's up against my finger, okay? Now, you might be saying, not my finger, but when you use your finger, you're actually gonna go up just up to the tip of the burr. That still leaves me some nice contact points with my mounting, but the beautiful thing is that I can only cut my finger if I bring the burr up here. If you look at the curvature, and everybody's finger's got this nice round at the end, right here I can't cut myself. So when you look at how the burr runs out, okay, let me cut some good stuff for a second here. All right, I'm cutting a bearing here. And you'll see the negative space in there. Let me put a little bit more in here. You can't start the burr while it's touching. You have to let it run, get it to speed. Okay. Now you can see that negative space begin to take place for where the stone is going to set. Okay. I'll have to come down, deep in the pavilion angle. Now you can really see a bearing take shape there. Some other things about this burr control issue is that I'm normally cutting the prong that is somewhat pointing to the northwest. If you want to use the screen in its perspective, you know, this prong would be somewhat to the northwest. It's not the east prong, it's not the south prong, but it's to the northwest. That allows me to take my thumb and this is where the push is coming from, it's coming from my thumb and my palm pushing outward, okay? So this is where I get the travel as far as into the prong is where it's coming from, okay? And I've got good control. Slow down, push too hard, and pop. The burr's gonna pop right out that side. It's gonna wrap around, okay? If you use the east prong when you cut, look where the burr runs out. The burr is gonna run out in here. It's gonna run into your finger, okay? That's not the only reason I do the northwest prong. There's reasons to do that. It's as a right-hander, it's more comfortable to push that way than it is to pull. I feel like you have more control in the outward swing than you do with the pulling back in. But this kind of normal abrasions, this is just real normal for a professional stone setter to have that. So I showed with the heart burr, I showed with the setting burr before, taking my finger off. Take this off, and this is just, you just can't control the burr. So some other things that I think what helps a lot with burr control is just being comfortable at the bench. One of the things that I think is difficult is you see somewhat beginners want to set up a particular prong straight. So it's straight with the bench, level with the bench, and so on. That causes the flex shaft to be straight up and down, except the motor doesn't hang directly over your head normally. It's off to if you're right-handed, it's off to your right shoulder. If you're left-handed, it normally, and you use your left hand dominant for cutting, it would be off to your left. So this is a difficult thing also because just like the camera sees whether you're tilted back and forth this way, it can't see this tilt. When you bring work over to the side and working in this northwest prong here, when you see this, it's pretty easy for you to see this way, okay? And you're using the tops of the prongs, the gallery of the mounting, any number of things to give you some visual cues of straight. So even though it's off at a tilt, and if you really think about jewelry and so much of it being freeform and things, anchored here and anchored there, it's very common to have to be cutting on some angles. So this is my preferred because once you get to this angle, I can see this tilt a little bit, and I can lean my head around and see this tilt a little bit. It just splits the angle difference. But if you look at where the handpiece is now going up towards the flex shaft, this is a much more natural position, and it lets the flex shaft come down in a kind of a gradual curve, where coming up straight causes the flex shaft to have an S curve, okay? That's really important. You might notice that I'm not using a hand rest or anything underneath the bench. I tell my students that, it's kind of hard to learn how to dance with crutches. I don't think you ever really develop these skills that you can see, that you can have this great burr control if you are mandatory for something to hold your hand. So these are just, some of the things that I think make a big difference. I want you to be aware that using any burrs, cutting anything, drilling, to doing any of that, you have some risk involved, and you should be careful. Use medium speeds for most things, and just make sure that you let the burr do the work, and that you're not pushing so hard that you're going to cause something to slip or whatever. Everything you see me doing here is really based on letting the burr work. As soon as I push, that's what's going to happen. You can't push. These are some of my finer points to help you with your bearing cutting procedures. Thanks again for watching. For more information, contact riogrande.com or call 1-800-545-6566.